Alright, so today I want to introduce you to a term you may or may not have heard before, and that is parthenogenesis. And it actually has to do with breeding snakes. And if you've been watching my videos, you know I keep and breed ball pythons on a pretty large scale. I produce about 100 hatchlings a year. And take a look at this beauty. This is one I just hatched out, a bamboo ball python. Take a look at that beauty. He is a really beautiful snake. He just hatched out, hasn't even had a single meal yet. It hasn't even shed yet. Normally you wait for a shed before you feed them their first meal, but this guy's just really gorgeous. This is really the exciting part of breeding snakes. And I know a lot of people, they have ball pythons and they're like, all right, I just want a pet. I never want to breed my snake, and that's fine. But keep in mind that you can actually have your snake reproduce asexually by parthenogenesis. In other words, if you have a female snake, you may not need a male for that snake to actually reproduce. And it's pretty rare, but I've actually heard about it in different species of snakes and birds and sharks and insects, and a lot of different animals actually kind of randomly reproduce by parthenogenesis. And I was actually looking at a video online. I was kind of wondering if ball pythons have ever produced asexually. And the thing that you really have to keep in mind is that when you're breeding any snake or ball pythons, that they can actually retain sperm for up to 5 years. So for example, if you pair a male and a female together, 5 years down the road, that female can actually lay eggs from retained sperm from the male. So I think a lot of people kind of get confused because there's been a lot of people that, you know, catch snakes in the wild and then they bring them into their collections, and, you know, they say, all right, I've had the snake for 3 years, it laid eggs, it must be parthenogenesis. When in fact, it could possibly be retained sperm when that snake was, you know, in the wild, you know, mating with males, and it just retained the sperm. So the thing you really have to think about as far as parthenogenesis, I've actually seen a video that there was a guy actually had a ball python that laid a clutch of eggs, and it hadn't been with a male for 14 years. The guy had it for 14 years and it laid a clutch of eggs, and it was like 5 eggs and a slug. 5 good fertilized eggs laid through parthenogenesis. And the thing you have to think about is it's essentially what's really happening is it's a clone of the female. So the female is essentially cloning herself by asexual reproduction, and it's really kind of the most severe form of inbreeding that you can get in any snake. So the problem with parthenogenesis is a lot of times the offspring won't be viable. Especially with live bearers, you get a lot of stillbirths, or if you're hatching eggs, you can get a lot of genetic deformities in the hatchlings. And I've actually seen multiple ways that you can actually get parthenogenesis to happen. I'm not going to go into like all the genetics. I'm not a geneticist, but I do know some of the basics. And sometimes you'll actually clone the snake. Well, you have an exact DNA copy of the female snake. This one's not produced by parthenogenesis. I actually had a male and a female to produce this one, but this is just kind of one of my new hatchlings that I'm excited about. And the other way they can reproduce is, typically what happens when you produce an offspring, you get half of the DNA from the male, half the DNA from the female. And what actually happens sometimes, instead of getting an exact copy of the female, what actually happens is the female will donate half of her DNA and it gets copied twice. So it's like half the DNA copied, you know, twice, and they call that a half clone, which is not exactly genetically identical to the female. It's kind of a weird anomaly. And I've actually seen, you know, whole clutches of, as a matter of fact, I've seen some bamboos crossed with normals, and they end up with a whole clutch of bamboos. I'm thinking, all right, the odds are 50% bamboo, 50% normal. What are the odds of getting 100% bamboos? It's pretty astronomical odds. And then I discovered parthenogenesis. And if that female would actually, even if you paired it up, if it would have reproduced asexually by parthenogenesis, then 100% of the babies would actually be identical copies of the female, which is kind of interesting, which would result in possibly a whole clutch of bamboos, which is kind of mind-boggling. And the other thing you have to think about is, you know, kind of a good way to know if you have parthenogenesis going on. So for example, if you bred a female that had like 3 or 4 genes in her makeup, say it was like a pastel calico clown pied or something crazy like that, and you bred it to a male, you would expect a whole rainbow of different morphs coming out of that female. And with parthenogenesis, essentially what you get is all the offspring would be exactly the same as the females, and they would all have the 4 genes, 3 or 4 genes, or whatever the female has. They would all be exactly identical. So if you get some weird breedings going on, if you're breeding something with your female and all of a sudden you get a whole clutch of offspring that look exactly like your female, especially if you have multiple genes in the female and all the babies come out looking exactly like it, I would say there's a high probability that you're actually seeing parthenogenesis in that offspring. All right, speaking of breeding ball pythons, I actually have a bunch of ball python eggs in my incubator. None of them were produced from parthenogenesis. They were all produced from pairing males and females. And I just kind of wanted to go through my egg boxes really quick and replace the press and seal that I used to seal the top. And what I like to do is I like to kind of replace that press and seal every week or two to make sure that none of the moisture is dripping down on the eggs. And I also have some that are a few days past hatching, and I want to see if some of those eggs have little baby snakes kind of peeking out. It'll be kind of interesting. So let's check out those boxes of eggs. All right, so this was actually my very first clutch where I had some bamboos and stuff coming out, and there was just 2 left in the egg that were kind of peeking out, and I wanted to see if they actually came out. And sure enough, my last 2 snakes from my first clutch came out. These are just empty shells. It's interesting, the egg shells for snakes are really kind of leathery and pliable. It's kind of an interesting kind of a shell on those eggs. And take a look at these beauties. Look at how dry they are. They are really good looking. What I need to do is I need to rinse these guys off, set them up in little hatchling tubs, and what I do, I just rinse them, rinse out the vermiculite, kind of hydrate them a little bit more, set them up in hatchling tubs, figure out the males and females, and put some labels on those boxes. I'll come back to these, but I wanted to check out my other boxes of eggs. All right, so this box was actually supposed to hatch 2 days ago, according to the hatch date, but you know, my very first box was about 2 weeks behind, so I'm not sure if anything is going to be out of here. This was my Lemon Blast, which is a pastel pinstripe crossed with my Coral Glow. So I'm hoping for some Coral Glow Lemon Blast. So let's take a look in here. And wow, look at that. Wow. I have some snakes coming out. Take a look at that. That is wild. I'm not even sure. Wow, I have 1 snake out. He's all the way out. Take a look at that. I'm not even exactly sure what that is. That is, it almost looks like, that almost looks like a Coral Glow Lemon Blast, I would say. That looks like a pastel pinstripe, but it has a lot of orange along the belly that I've never really seen before. Look at how orange that is. So that may be the 3 gene combo that I've been wanting to hit. That is pretty amazing. Looks really interesting. And I got a couple more peeking out. This one looks like, it looks like it has Coral Glow in it. This one almost looks like a normal. That is really awesome. So what I'm actually going to do on this one, I noticed there's a lot of humidity on the top of this press and seal, and almost like puddled up in here. I kind of like to catch it before it gets that bad. What I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the press and seal. I want to put this in the incubator for a few more days, and then we'll go back through this and get a better in-depth look at some of these hatchlings. Well, it looks like I'm going to have a really good season. So this is what I use. It's just press and seal, Glad press and seal. And I just essentially just put it on the top, seal it up like that. I'll put it back in the incubator and let it cook a little bit longer. Alright, so this one's actually supposed to hatch in 2 days. This was my fire pied crossed with a normal. We'll take a look at this one and see what we can see. That one, wow, look at all this moisture. This is almost, it's like a whole puddle of moisture in there. It's almost too much moisture on the press and seal. This one smells kind of musty, I would say. I'd say these eggs are still looking good enough to hatch though. There's a lot of moisture that dripped down on the eggs when I pulled that press and seal off. And I like to really keep the moisture off the eggs as much as possible. But it looks like these are all looking pretty good. Looks like they'll probably hatch okay. All right, so this was my scaleless head crossed with my lesser. And these are about a week out, I would say. These are kind of getting interesting. There's a little bit of mold on some of these eggs. You can see they're kind of looking moldy, but and you know, really the mold really isn't an issue for some of these eggs. It's really when they dimple down really bad that's the problem, or if they really start smelling really bad. These smell just a little bit musty, but they still look like they'll all hatch. All right, so this clutch is about another month away before it actually is going to hatch. This was my pastel crossed with my bamboo. Let's take a look at this one. These are kind of looking almost the same as the last one. For some reason, I'm getting kind of a little bit of a musty odor, a little bit of mold maybe. It's perfectly fine though. These I like the eggs that are really plump and firm like that. It doesn't really look like there's any issues at all. These look like they're doing really well. All right, so these really haven't been in the incubator that long. It looks like we have about a month and a week or so before these will hatch. This was my pastel pinstripe crossed with my pastel desert ghost, which should be pretty amazing. And so the desert ghost is recessive, so I'll get everything will be het desert ghost on these. And I could get some lemon blasts and super blasts, super pastels, some pinstripes, a bunch of stuff like that. So a lot of these I'm thinking about maybe holding some of these back, working some other genes into my desert ghost project. All right, so since we have some hatchlings from that very first clutch, I thought I'd bring you along for the ride, and we can take a look at these in a little more detail. Let's take a look at these guys, and I really want to set them up in my hatchling rack. So when they first come out of the egg, they have to shed before you feed them. So essentially they're kind of really dry right now because they're getting ready to shed. And what I want to do is I have some water here that is about 90 degrees. I just want to kind of hydrate them a little and wash them off, kind of get that shed hydrated, get all the vermiculite off of them. And you can see they're kind of moving around a little bit. And you notice some of these kind of have a little swollen part right in the belly here. And that is essentially from the yolk of the egg. It just kind of gives them a little swollen belly right there. It's perfectly normal. So what I'm going to do now is I want to figure out which ones are male and which are female. And what I do is I use this little probe kit here. And it's for a bunch of different size snakes. And for a small snake like this, essentially what I do is I use the smallest size probe, and I use a little bit of lubricating jelly here on the probe, and we stick it in the pocket of the tail of the snake. Essentially it's right in here, in the pocket here. And if the snake relaxes, we can figure out which one's a male, which one's a female. And sometimes it's easier said than done. Sometimes they're a little bit squirmy. And it's really the way you hold the tail. You have to hold it just like that. Stick it right in here. And this one's going way in there. This is definitely a male. Good looking snake. Take a look at that one. These are normal 50% het caramel albino. So here's the tub that comes with my hatchling rack. This is an ARS 1039 hatchling rack, and it's the same tub as any of the ARS hatchling racks. It has this little 8-ounce deli cup that you can put in there, and then I put coconut husk substrate in there. I happen to have a whole bunch of it right here. Let me see if I can get some of the substrate in here. And I mixed this up earlier. Put it right in here. Just like that. And this is the hot spots back here, about 90 degrees. There's a little heater in there. And I just kind of like to keep that open so the snake can sit on the heat. And then what I'll do is I really kind of try to keep the substrate a little bit lower than this, because you can see if you get it too high, it kind of falls in the water dish. So you don't want a whole bunch of substrate in there. You just want enough to where it keeps the humidity in there, kind of keeps the mess from getting everywhere. That is about perfect. All right, so I'm gonna look at this last snake here. It's all balled up, and see if this one is a male or a female. I'm just gonna get a little more humidity on it, get it wet again, see if it kind of relaxes a little bit. It's funny, that's why they call them ball pythons, is because they ball up in a tight little ball when they get scared. It's pretty amazing. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna wipe off my probe, put a little more lubricating jelly on it, and then we'll take a look at this one. And sometimes it's better if they're all wrapped up and they're not running all over. It's a little bit easier sometimes. We'll take a look at this one. And this can kind of fool you if the snake is tense and it doesn't go all the way in. If it doesn't go all the way in, then either the probe's too big, or this one's kind of tricky because it's going in, I think, further than a female. So if it goes in really deep, then it's a male. If it doesn't go that deep, then it's a female. This one's kind of in the middle, which probably means the snake is a little bit too small for my probe. I'm guessing this one might be a male. If you probe them right away after they're born, they tend to kind of trick you. So what you really need to do is you need to go back a few weeks later, maybe when they're a month or two old, and probe them again just to be sure of the gender. But if we can get this guy unraveled, we can look at him a little bit better. Come on out, buddy. Take a look at how beautiful that snake is. Just a regular, normal ball python, 50% het caramel albino. The mom was 100% het caramel albino, and it's just because that was one of the big females that I bought on Morph Market, and it just happened to have the caramel albino gene in it. So it's kind of been carried along with all these offspring. It kind of gets diluted a little bit, but it's a really good looking snake. And in the normals, sometimes the normals can be really variable as far as the patterns on the belly. This one kind of has almost kind of a clear middle belly and kind of tracks on the side. Look at how skinny that snake is. This snake, as soon as it sheds, I definitely need to get some meals into that snake. Alright, I couldn't resist. I had to pull out this little unknown snake here from the other clutch, the one that came out. I want to give it a little bit of water and dry it off. And let's take a better look at this beauty. This, to me, you know, usually if you have a lemon blast, it doesn't have the orange in the sides. This, to me, looks like a lemon blast coral glow. Sure enough, that's what I would think it is. I would think it looks like it has pastel pinstripe and coral glow in the mix. this actually, it's, you know, I always hatch out these snakes and it's like, this is the one I want to hold back, I want to keep this one, and then pretty soon all my racks are full of baby snakes, and then I don't have any room for any more baby snakes, and I end up selling all my holdbacks because they're all so cool. And I'm not sure if I want to really expand my operation to the point where, you know, I'm really keeping a lot of these snakes, but look how beautiful that is. Just take a look at that snake. So if you bred this to something else, you'll get pastels, pinstripes, and coral glows all in different combinations. And as a matter of fact, if you bred this to another 2 or 3 gene animal, you'd get an incredible array of snakes from this combo. Alright, so that wraps up my discussion on parthenogenesis, and let me tell you, none of these hatchlings that I have are produced that way. I produce them the old-fashioned way, pairing up a male and a female. As a matter of fact, a lot of people have been asking me about this snake. This is my male bamboo. This is probably the only bamboo that I have that's breeding size. So all the bamboo stuff that you see in my collection, it all came from this guy. This is my very first one that kind of kick-started my whole bamboo project. And if you're thinking about getting a snake and you're worried, you know, you absolutely don't want any hatchlings at all, including parthenogenesis, I would highly recommend buying a male, because no matter what, a male can't reproduce. It's kind of like when if you remember Jurassic Park, and then, you know, they produce all the dinosaurs and they're like, oh yeah, don't worry, we produced them all female so they don't reproduce because there's no males, and they actually reproduced by parthenogenesis. And that was the problem with Jurassic Park. You know, if those scientists would have been smarter, they would have actually produced them all male, and then you wouldn't have to worry about them reproducing whatsoever, which is pretty amazing. So some people have been asking about which camera and gear that I use for these videos, and as a matter of fact, I just bought this camera a few months ago, and I am incredibly pleased with the quality of the video from this camera, and it's a Canon 77D. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put affiliate links in the description below this video so you can check out what I'm using. It's a Canon 77D, and I'm using a 10 to 18 millimeter EF-S Canon lens, and let me tell you, it's probably the perfect combo of lens and camera. I actually got the idea for the setup from the channel Think Media. I don't know if you've ever been over there. It's a really great, you know, creator website. It helps YouTubers grow, and it recommends a lot of camera gear, and that is where I got the idea for this camera. And let me tell you, it's one of the new cameras, and it's on sale right now, so you can get it at a really good discount. I'd say between the camera and the lens, it's probably about $1,000, so it's pretty steep, but let me tell you, compared to other cameras, it just blows them all away as far as what I've seen. I've actually tried to put a mic on here. I've tried a wireless mic and a bunch of different mics, and this, what I'm recording right now, is actually with no mic at all. It's just the mic straight from the camera, and it seems like the sound quality is so good on this camera that even an external mic, unless you get a really expensive mic that's probably worth more than your camera, that you really can't get one better than the quality of sound coming from this camera. So I know I've had a few questions about what I'm using to record these, and that is what I'm using. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.